Welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time today, joining us on this webinar organized by DALIM Software. My name is Isabelle Bilreriel, and I am the European Business Development Director at DALIM Software. Our today webinar is about DAM, and more especially, why do you need a digital asset management tool for your organization and how to select the right one. Is there any recipe to determine which DAM will meet your needs and turn your DAM journey into a success? This is a big question we're going to address today. And to help us answering those questions, we have the great pleasure to welcome today as a panelist, Theresa REGLI. Theresa is a well-known digital asset manager expert, and she's also a data orchestrator. Theresa will be sharing with us today her experience about DAM and how in the DAM kitchen, cooking up the perfect workflow. Hi, Theresa. Hope everything is fine.
Hi, Isabel. Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Could you please give us a few words about yourself?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you again to DALIM Software for inviting me. I've been working in the digital asset management industry for about 13 years now, and more broadly in information technology for over 20 years. And I focus on digital asset management strategy and helping organizations select dams, implement dams, and also cleaning up their data to make sure that their dams will work properly.
Thank you, Theresa. Thank you for this introduction. So just before starting the webinar, let me give you a little bit of housekeeping. So you can see on the screen a webinar panel where you have a section where you can ask some questions. So please submit all your questions during the session, and we will do our best to address all of them at the end of the presentation. Now it's time to start. So let's discover together the DAM mystery and how cooking up the perfect workflow. Next slide, please. So if we consider what companies are facing today, so they are in this journey of digital transformation. There's a lot of data everywhere. Next slide. Where they have to deal with different kind of content, all kind of content, rich content, could be some pictures, could be some video, could be some interactive infographic, could be tutorial, could be any kind of digital assets that will be useful for communicating to marketing, to social media about the product, could be packaging for presenting products. Next slide, please. And to get this all coordinated, then this is where the DAM actually is entering into the scene. So it's actually a dam. So today we may see a dam as a mam or a pam on a bam. So there's a lot of words, but what is a dam? A dam is a place where you will be able to gather all your digital assets, get them classified, and of course find them. So next slide, please. So this will be really the place where you will get your unique source of truth, where all your pictures, all your video, all your content will be classified. This will be a centralized place. And next slide, please. You will be able to find this content at the right moment when you will need it. So there's different way of finding this content. So you will be, of course, using different kind of search. You will get some filters. You can use some taxonomy, metadata. You can use also AI, or also, why not, like in this case, a color ambience for some picture to make sure that the pictures are the one with the red one. So it's different way of searching this information. Next slide, please. This is also the place where you will be able to review your different assets, to set up some approval workflow and automate the production of your asset, to transform them for different usage for the web, for the print, for social media. Next slide, please. This is also the place where you will be able to set up some very important information that we are calling metadata, and Theresa will be sharing some more about that. So metadata, this is all those kind of information that will help to qualify an asset in order to be able to find it easily. So there's many ways of doing this. You can do it manually, by bulk, or even using some AI technology. Next slide, please. And in doing so, DAM is becoming a very important part of your ecosystem. It will be connected with all your framework, and it will help you to bring a lot of efficiency among this network, to communicate better about your product, to communicate better with the different audience you want to communicate with. Next slide, please. But the big question, and this is a question actually we going to address today, if we look at the marketing technology landscape, this is a very crowded landscape, because if we started a few years ago with a certain number of applications, today there's more than 7,000 different applications. Next slide, please. And this is very difficult in this jungle to find the right technology. And if we consider into this jungle, what is the part related to them, we see it's a very small rectangle in the middle of this framework. So next slide, please. I think this is now time to discover with Theresa what is the recipe, what are the ingredients to turn your DAM journey into success. Theresa, I think now we are all looking forward to hear from you the good news and to listen to you about what is the best recipe to be successful with the DAM.
Great, thank you, Isabel, and thanks everyone for attending this afternoon or morning, depending where you are. So this is a story that I told recently at the DALIM user conference in Lisbon, and I'm reprising it here. And the idea is to think about, how can a creative workflow work like a kitchen? In great kitchens, we see really amazing business process going on. It's very phenomenal the way great kitchens work. And so I'd like to tell you a little story about a kitchen, and then I will draw a parallel to creative workflow and how that works. So I already introduced myself earlier very briefly, but just to give you a little bit more about what I do, as I mentioned, I do DAM strategy and related consulting. And a couple of years ago, I wrote a book about DAM, actually 3 years ago now, and it's called Digital and Marketing Asset Management. So if you are new to DAM and you're trying to learn about the basics, it's a good and inexpensive way to learn about digital asset management and what it could do for you. And I work with a large range of clients across large organizations as well as small ones. I like to especially help performing arts organizations and museums. And I also teach at King's College in London, which is the one school in the world that has a master's degree program in digital asset management. If you didn't know that, you can come to London and take a full year of classes on DAM. So my story for you today begins outside the city of New York in the United States, where if you drive about 20 minutes north from New York City, 25 minutes, there's a very beautiful restaurant. And this is a picture of the outside of the restaurant at dusk when the sun is setting. And this is where the very wealthy Rockefeller family used to have one of their homes. And it was taken and it was converted into this beautiful restaurant, and it was intended to be really a singular vision of a culinary genius, a man called Dan Barber. And this restaurant has repeatedly been voted one of the best restaurants in the world by many chefs and restaurant critics. And as a chef, Dan Barber is someone who was really a scholar. He has won many awards, and personally, this is probably one of my favorite restaurants in the world. Now, this is a chef who really understands assets. Of course, his assets are not digital. They are things that they grow. And one of the things that's very unique about this restaurant is that they actually grow a whole lot of their own ingredients. In fact, they grow most of their own ingredients. And they tend to serve these assets very simply. They present them in a beautiful, simple way with just one touch, maybe just a bit of salt. But every time they put these assets in front of the people who are dining, they tend to tell a story about how they were grown. And frankly, just like a great advertisement, or when you're buying a product or you're seeing a really good piece of marketing, you hear the story behind it. It's not just about the experience of the product itself, it's also about the story behind the product. So these are the beautiful vegetables that are grown in the Stone Barns garden. That's the name of the restaurant. It's Blue Hill at Stone Barns. So in this case, and this is true with digital assets as well, quantity isn't everything. More isn't more. Really, better is better. And that's what we need to aspire to in digital asset management. How do we take what we have and manage it well, rather than just create more? So, what is an asset? And when we think about what an asset is, it's really changed a lot over the years. It used to just be one picture or maybe one photograph, but we can take assets now and we can serve them up in multiple ways. So we could take the same spinach, for example, and we could serve it as leaves, or we could serve it as a work of art. And the same is true of our digital assets every day. We can take an original photograph, we can modify that photograph, we can use it in context, and we can present in many different ways a digital asset. And this is part of the value of digital asset management, is being able to adapt the assets, being able to change it for different audiences, and being able to take our assets and customize them for a particular audience. So this is the idea of co-creation. In this particular case, of course, the chef might be working with the farmer, but then you have a particularly creative chef in the kitchen who might make the dish to the right, where you have a puree with various flavors of spices sprinkled over it, and it enhances the experience for people who might like something a bit different. So this is Dan Barber. He's the master of the assets in this kitchen, and he's the chef I was talking about. And you can see he's here in the kitchen, and he's really looking things up. He's working. He's right in front of all the chefs, and he's watching the action. Now, a digital asset manager has to be similarly involved in the day-to-day operations of the creation of digital assets. And this is particularly important, of course, in a kitchen, because you have specialized people at each station. You tend to have someone who specializes in meat, cooking the meat. You tend to have someone who specializes in vegetables. You tend to have someone who's chopping and is really good with knives, doing the chopping. And so it's a similar situation in our creative environments. And this is a really important element of our creative workflows, is giving the right tools and also the right equipment to the specialists so that they can particularly do what they need. And then having someone oversee and connect the different parts of the workflow. And that really creates a very optimal situation. Now, Dan, the chef, he works very closely with farmers. So behind these two beautiful creations here, you can see, perhaps you see, I'm moving my mouse, this gentleman on the left with a brown jacket. He's actually one of the farmers, and he came in. This picture was taken by me while I was eating this dinner in the kitchen. And he's actually having a conversation with the person who's growing the food and the person who's originally creating the food. And if you are a marketing director, if you are a DAM manager, you need to really be in touch with the people who are creating the original assets. You can't have a siloed environment. You have to be collaborative. You have to constantly encourage conversation. And that conversation might be in person, but of course it also might be within your creative workflow tool. And I'll show some examples later where DALIM can facilitate that sort of interaction and that sort of environment. So here's a concept that's also very important, which is the idea that you have servers and runners. Now, these are the people in the back here who are coming to pick up the plates. These are the ones that's like our systems downstream that are going to serve to the customers. So DAM is really about preparing our digital assets, combining our digital assets in interesting ways. And those assets need to go out to our delivery system. So you think about the servers, or the runners, as they're sometimes called, going back and forth to the kitchen. These are like our downstream systems, our web content management systems, our mobile applications that are taking these well-prepared, specialized assets and making sure they get to the customer. They're also the systems that are listening to the customer saying, well, you know, I'm allergic to gluten, or I'm allergic to something else. You can't give me the dish that way. I need it a different way. Our customer experience is similar. We need to build these sorts of customized and personalized experiences, because that's what really gives people a good feeling about our brands, about our companies, and about our products. So these are tickets. These are the orders. And if you've ever worked in a kitchen or looked in a kitchen, these are always hanging up there. And I don't think these have gone electronic yet. I've never seen a kitchen operate completely electronically, usually because the chefs have their hands dirty, right? They're really in the mess of everything. But this is the workflow of a kitchen. And it's never the same every night, right? It's a fixed structure, but it allows for variability. And this is another thing that's really important about organizing our creative workflows, is to have a structure, but don't over-regiment it. It can't be too structured, because creative people need to a little bit change the way they're doing things and maybe allow a little bit of variation. So the exact placement of these tickets, you could see on the left-hand side, you've got the time that a particular dish went out, special instructions in red, and that's the personalization piece, where maybe somebody wants a particular substitute or something else taken off the dish. And then you've got other pieces of workflow along this track here. So again, it's a system, but it's not overly regimented. It allows for flexibility, it allows for annotation, and this is really important in our creative workflows as well, to have a system, but not to make it too strict or overly regimented. So what does this look like in a kitchen? And then I'll show what this looks like in our creative environment. In a kitchen, you've got a lot of different sort of alleyways of activity. And as I mentioned, specialists work in different domains. So you've got different people working with different tools and with different ingredients. And what you find in these great kitchens is that people are often yelling out to each other, like, oh, I have a hot dish, or I have a hot pan, and asking people to get out of the way, or say, incoming, dish coming by. And there's this constant din in the kitchen. There's this constant communication. This is the environment we need to create, not just in our own personal environments, but also within our creative workflow systems. We need to have ongoing communication. We need to know what the status is of what people are working on. And it's not just about the workflow itself. It's about informing people about the workflow. It's about keeping them in the loop. And it's about letting people who are downstream, such as the marketers or the advertisers, know what's coming. Because when they know what's coming, they're going to be more prepared when the dish is ready to serve it up in the most optimal way. So what can we in the creative production world really learn from the great kitchens of the world? And what's cooking up now as we think about it? Well, whether independent or inherent to the dam, you need to give the whole team that crucial view into what's going on. Right? This helps with prioritization, it helps with regulation, it helps with everything that's going on in the kitchen. And you can, in a proper workflow tool, and of course a DAM tool integrated with that, you can have tasks that can be assigned properly, and different work can be carried out in parallel without confusion, because everybody knows where you're going. When you have a defined, regimented workflow with flexibility, then there's awareness, there's visibility, and this really helps to facilitate and not regulate. And I recently wrote a white paper for DALIM on this particular topic. So if you go to DALIM's website, you can download the paper, and it's specifically about how these workflow tools should facilitate, not overly regiment the process. And then you can really measure the outcomes that lead to further improvements down the line. So here's an example of designing a workflow in DALIM, and you can see here it's a very visual process. And I think it's important that we have visual ways to create workflows. We don't want to have to code it. So we can take different steps, we can connect those steps, we can put them in a sequence, and putting this together is, again, what allows the flexibility. So if somebody wants to skip a step or needs to skip a step because someone's on vacation or off on a holiday, then you need that sort of flexibility, and also the ability of somebody who's not technical to be able to design a workflow on the fly very quickly is important, because you might have a special project or a special campaign that needs to go out very quickly. So that's part of what this sort of tool facilitates. Here's what a typical workflow steps might look like. And this is from one of DALIM's customers called Boden, the fashion retailer in the UK. And what you can see here is it's perhaps a rather typical workflow, but oftentimes even something that's this simple can get very hairy and can get very complex. So a photo shoot is, of course, extremely important for a retailer, because you're going to take pictures of the people who are the models that are wearing the clothing. You might take some pictures in a particular location, and that could be thousands of pictures. And someone has to get those pictures from the camera into a system, and then someone has to go through those pictures and give them maybe star ratings so that you can decide which ones you're going to use and which ones you're going to discard. Then that selection has to be uploaded somewhere. It has to be edited potentially. It has to be touched up. Then it has to become incorporated into the whole advertising campaign or the marketing campaign. So this is a typical workflow, but it's also allowing for a certain degree of flexibility, because you don't necessarily have to upload all the photos at the same time. You don't have to necessarily edit them all at the same time. Every photo could go through this, or groups of photos could go through this. So having a high-level process that is variable and flexible is the key, really, to success. So here's another screenshot that shows, what various assets might look like within DALIM, and you have here labels. And labels, to Isabel's point earlier, packaging is becoming a really big part of digital asset management process as well, because this is part of what gives visibility to marketers as far as what's coming down the line. It used to be that this was a very siloed workflow that would happen in a completely separate environment. But now marketers want to know, what is the package going to look like, so I can design the advertising? What are the different versions of the package for different countries, so that the local markets can get access to those different packages and start to do the translations and things like that. So here you can see different packages within the context of the environment in terms of what they would look like to the actual consumer. So in terms of making this possible, to go back to my kitchen metaphor, getting everything in place is really important. So the French, they call this mise en place, which is getting everything in its place before you start. Line cooks in a kitchen, they have to make sure all their stations are stocked up. They have to make sure that all the ingredients are ready to go. If you're going to feed 400 different people over the course of an evening, you have to have everything in line. And if you're going to deliver thousands of marketing campaigns over the course of a year, you have to get your content together. You have to know which compartment it's in. You have to know what components are going to make up your campaign. And as any cook knows, if you start cooking before this is done, before this mise en place is done, things will go wrong. You'll get to a step and then you don't know where that particular ingredient is, or you have to squeeze the lime, but you don't have the knife to cut the lime. And so you can get in that situation with content as well. You need to have your content lined up. You need to have it structured, just like this picture is structured with the ingredients, in order to deliver things in the most effective way, for sure. So here's a close-up of some of the packaging environment that I showed before. And this is that collaboration that I was talking about, and the importance of collaboration in the environment where maybe you can't physically be with your colleagues. But in this particular case, you can see people are annotating and really honing in on something that might need to change. You can put a link in, you could say whatever you need to say, and anyone in any location around the world would be able to see those comments, to comment on those comments, and it's creating a virtual kitchen in the software without everybody being in the same place, which can be extremely important for global companies. Okay, so once you have everything in its place, you're in much better shape, right? Once you actually serve things up, it should be like the beautiful Japanese bento box that you have when you order a bento box in Japan. It's all very, very organized, and everything is in its place, and you have a very understandable and clear customer experience because it's where you expect things to be. And that's what cooking up the right workflow should result in. It's going to result in a better and organized customer experience. And when you bring all these elements together in an effective way, it can be very, very powerful. So this is a picture of a hawker center in Singapore. And if you've been to Singapore, you have these massive food areas where there's little stalls, and every stall specializes in a particular food. It's very rare that these particular stalls serve more than one or two things because they specialize. And so this is the delivery environment, right? You've got the right ingredients, you're putting it together correctly, and then you're serving up a very specific experience to the consumer. And that's the power of doing workflow well, and that's the power of doing digital asset management well. So here's again a screenshot of being able to look at different versions of something. And this is, in this particular example, the pictures on the right, all those stands serve Singapore chicken rice. And chicken rice is probably the most popular thing in Singapore. It's something that Singapore is really known for. But you can have 10 different kinds and compare them right there. And in this example from DALIM, you can see if you have multiple versions of something and people are commenting, you can actually just drag a line across the screen and you can see the different versions and compare the different versions and comment on the different versions. And this is also a really important part of the creative process. Okay, now I'm just going to play a short video. I hope it comes through all right on the webinar. But this is about, this is Dan Barber talking about the importance of selecting the right tool. So to Isabel's point, how do you select the right tool? And it really has to do with what your use cases are and what is the intent of how you're going to use the tool. So let's think about a chef's view on that first.
My favorite gadget, from the beginning of when I was cooking is a spoon, like the right size spoon. All the cooks think I'm crazy in both the kitchens at Blue Hill because I only have one size spoon that we use the entire time. Like, there's and cooking kitchens, you generally see like different stations have different size spoons, like big shovel spoons and sometimes small ones, depending on what your job is. I use one spoon, and I think it's the right size spoon for plating and the right size spoon for tasting. It's not too big, it's not too small. And I want everyone to have the same consistency because the spoon, whether you're flipping a piece of fish or a piece of meat or you're mixing vegetables or you're stirring rice or whatever it is, the spoon is just this great extension of your hand. It becomes like the closest thing you can get to your hand where you're in control of the food, really in control of the food. Like these tongs and these forks, like, ugh, they're nowhere near the kitchen because they tend to have this relationship with food that's very dispassionate and literally detached. Whereas the spoon, if you hold it close, you're in control of you're mastering what you're preparing. And I think that spreads itself out across the kitchens in ways that end up having tastier food.
So the importance of the right tool is not just about what you're doing with the tool, it's also about you, and it's about your creative team, and it's about how you like to work. So I have seen some tools and some pieces of software succeed extremely well with some companies and fail miserably with other companies. And I think that's because people are different, and there's not one tool that's right for everybody. But the other message here is that complexity doesn't equal the right tool either. Just like earlier when I said it's not about creating more content, it's about creating better content and targeted content. It's the same thing with the technology. Many big companies, especially, they buy very expensive software, they buy very complex tools when really maybe they needed something simple like a spoon. So you need to think about, what is your spoon and what are you using for your workflow, but also what is the tool that everybody in your workflow can use. And that might be different parts of the same piece of software, or it might be integrating different pieces of software. And think about those particular strengths and those particular needs of each user in your world. Oops, sorry, that played twice. Okay, so what is your spoon? The what might be clear, but the how may not be. You know what you need to do. It's just a matter of figuring it out how. And this is a picture that I took in Southeast Asia, where, you know, here's a woman who makes fried bananas, and it's the most delicious dessert you could possibly imagine. And what is she? She just has a wok and oil and a big strainer to take out the bananas once they've been fried. And maybe you need something that simple as well. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be complex, and the method to get to the next point might not be obvious. This is why you should analyze your workflow. This is why you should really think about what's the right tool for you. So here's how this kitchen analogy sort of goes into the creative workflow environment. So if we have our creative environment here, you know, raw assets, they come into the kitchen, and then there's all these specialized people that are maybe working on them, modifying them, personalizing them. You've got your customers watching over here. You've got lots of social media channels. You might have to have an area where the master marketer or marketers, maybe it's the brand marketers, are looking at this final asset proofing in the top left before it goes out to the customer. And that's a really important thing. There has to be a series of checks. There has to be QA. There has to be a lot of different steps along the process to make sure that you're doing top quality and that you're delivering the best possible digital assets and the best possible campaigns. So a lot of this requires innovation. A lot of this requires investment. A lot of this requires that you take a team to really make this happen. And there's a classic conflict that happens with innovation. So let's say you decided, okay, I need a new piece of software. I need to rethink my workflows. How do you find time to do that? Right? How do you actually take a team and structure that team to create these new environments and these new tools, and to set up these new ways of working and still keep business going? That's the classic problem. So this chart is from a book called The Other Side of Innovation, and it's by someone named Chris Trimble. And it's a very interesting book, and if you have an interest in innovation, I recommend it. And what he means by the other side of innovation is everything that's after the idea. You know, really, the idea is often the easy part. It's much harder to make it happen. So what usually happens is that you've got, you know, let's say you got people, you got 100% of your staff. Maybe we say, okay, we're going to put 5% of our people on innovation, and we're only going to give maybe some of them 10% of their time and the rest of them only 5% of their time. So maybe they're going to spend half an hour a day on this new project while they are trying to keep the business going. And that's an issue. That's a problem. Because, as you know, it's hard to focus on many things at once. And it's especially hard to do your main job while you're trying to run and set up a new system. It's extremely difficult. So to ruin the conclusion of the book for you, but you should still read the book, part of what the outcome is, and part of what Chris Trimble recommends, is to actually put fewer people on innovation and, of course, more of their time. So have a dedicated team of experts from different areas to really work on this. And that will result in a more efficient deployment of your system. It'll result in a more efficient analysis of your current state workflows, and also the ability to get to your next state workflows. So fewer people, the right people, and more of their time on these projects will help you get to the next level better and quicker. So think about that, and if you want to show this slide to your management, hopefully it will help a great deal, but definitely pick up the book as well. Okay, so innovation sometimes isn't all that complex either. So you might even have an existing tool. If you're on this webinar, maybe you already work with DALIM, or maybe you have other tools that you're working with, and you might be able to just reconfigure that tool. You might be able to analyze your workflow, and you might be able to say, oh, you know, if we just automate these 2 steps, it's going to create all kinds of efficiency. And this is a picture that I like very much because it's different meat on sticks, right? So the concept is pretty simple. But why does this look so appetizing is because it's got so many different varieties of the same thing. And sometimes innovation is just a tweak or a variation on the theme. Maybe your workflows are fine, But if you could look at all your workflows and find 2 things that you can automate in every workflow, that might save a crazy amount of time for a whole lot of people. So you're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. You might just need a little tweak. You might just need a little automation, and that might go a long way. Okay, so summary. For a Michelin star in DAM, optimizing workflow is an ongoing, evolving task. It's not something that you just do and then it's over. Designing a workflow begins with this as is, and then you have to map out the ideal to-be process. And that includes, first and foremost, identifying the points that can be automated. There's so much manual work that happens. I was with a client last week who their creative team estimated that they spend 1 to 2 days a week per person just converting files from one format to another. So you think about this is 20 to 25% of people's time where they're just opening a file, saving it in a different format, which is something that a DAM can just do, can automate that. So think about possibly saving 20 to 25% of people's time, how much more they could be doing that's actually creative and interesting. So identifying those points is really important. Determining which system owns which part of the workflow is also very important. Where the handoffs will take place is crucial. So just like in the kitchen, who owns which parts of each dish and how those handoffs go from one person to the next so that the perfect plate is served up. And then finally, testing and improving should be done by the people who use the system. You know, it amazes me how many product selection teams do not involve a user, an end user of the system. So the best chefs really test the food while they're cooking, and they oversee all the plates before they leave the counter. So if you're in charge of a DAM or you're a marketer, you need to be thinking the same way. Okay, so my last part of the story here is just to tell you a story about one of the specialists who works in the kitchen at Stone Barns. And this particular gentleman that I was speaking with, he made these beautiful trees on the right-hand side here. And this is a serving structure here on the right, which is a metal serving structure. And at the end of each little branch was essentially a crispy vegetable of some kind. So maybe it was a piece of kale or a sweet potato or a purple potato, lots of very different and interesting vegetables. And I asked him, is this boring? You know, because he did this all the time, every day. And even creating these beautiful variations, like on the left-hand side, where you have a potato crisp with an herb and a little slit in it, and then it's deep fried. It was just amazing how beautiful these leaves were. And when I asked him if it got boring to do the same thing over and over again, he said, not at all. He said, I find my work so beautiful and so creative because not only because of how beautiful it looks, but also for every person I serve it to, it's a unique experience. And that's true. And so we have to think of the assets we're delivering. We have to think of the campaigns we're delivering, the content we're delivering as unique and different and new to every person who's consuming it. So you too need to have a vision as beautiful as this tree of vegetables. And you need to make sure that your team efforts are really united towards a single goal. You need to do your research. You need to make sure that you have the best raw ingredients. You need to leverage your specialists in every way possible. You need to choose the right equipment for you. You need to do your QA, your quality assurance. And then most of all, you need to know your customer. And you need to have a really methodical feedback loop to know what has gone well, what hasn't gone well, and what you could be doing better over time. So that is the summary, and I'll be happy to take some questions. I think Isabel's going to look at the questions and ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Theresa. This is a very interesting, appetizing program you just shared with us. Thank you for all this information. Yes, there's a couple of questions, actually. I have one question about how long does it take to implement a DAM solution?
Well, it really depends on how big it is and how many users there would be. I have seen some organizations set up a DAM in as little as 6 weeks. And that's because they're usually a small organization and they do a software as a service. So they would be subscribing to a SaaS solution that's already in the cloud and already set up. And so the vendor just sets up an instance for them. You set up roles and groups, and then you import your assets, and maybe you don't have a lot of assets. On the flip side, I've seen implementations that take a year to 18 months. And that might be because it's a very large organization and they have to integrate with multiple systems in order to show return. So if it's a large enterprise system and you have hundreds of thousands or millions of assets, that takes much longer. And usually what takes a lot of that time is the metadata cleanup and getting the metadata in the system over time and during the migration to make sure that the integrations will work later. And so it's not just really setting up the DAM system itself, it's the metadata and the integrations that have to happen that takes much longer.
Yeah, so there's no, it's really depending on what you're doing. So another question, do you recommend a full cloud DAM solution or hybrid or on-premise? So what is the best, Roy?
This really depends on what your security requirements are, and also what your cloud strategy is. I think organizations have different cloud strategies. The industry is definitely going towards the cloud. I follow about 30 to 35 different DAM vendors, and now I would say more than half of them only offer a cloud solution. And that's a reflection of where the industry is going. But I also still have some organizations who choose to do an on-premise. I have a client right now who's a museum, and they've chosen to do an on-premise installation because the subscription cost is just too expensive. And so they can't add the operational expense. They could spend a one-time capital expense, and so they could get a DAM, but the ongoing monthly cost was just too much for them. So some organizations still tend to choose on-premise, but they tend to be smaller. I don't see large Fortune 500 companies wanting to do on-premise anymore, but I do see some financial institutions, hospitals, organizations that have a very, very strict security and data protocols. They often are doing hybrids. So they want to keep all the data on-premise, they want to keep the assets themselves on-premise, but they might run the software in the cloud.
Okay. Yeah, so again, depending. So another one, what is the best profile for a DAM manager?
Oh, well, I've worked with a lot of DAM managers who were never DAM managers before. So sometimes when people get hired as DAM managers, they've never done that job since it's a relatively new role. I believe that a DAM manager needs to be somebody who's very enthusiastic. It needs to be someone who is very just excited and positive about DAM. It needs to be someone who has a lot of empathy, especially for creative workers. Someone who has a good sense of user experience and what the user experience of enterprise technology should be. It also needs to be someone who's very persuasive at convincing people to use a DAM, because that drives adoption. And anybody who has experience training with software, because even once you get through the first round of formal training for a DAM, it's really, really helpful to have somebody who just knows how to jump in and train people on the fly for a particular step, or it's just providing a lot of support. So those are key success factors for a DAM manager.
Yeah, I have another question. So that one is interesting. A lot of customers searching for a top user experience with easy to use solution, responsive. Do you recommend to use a DAM system as it is, or integrate it with a web portal or CMS? What would be your recommendation? Do a DAM for everything?
Well,
or
it again depends on your requirements. I think that just about every DAM offering now has a sort of web portal component. DAMs are increasingly 100% in the browser. There's still some vendors who have their sort of administrative or their power interface that's an installed solution. I don't think you need to integrate with a CMS to have that presentation layer. DAMs will do it themselves generally, but it is a good idea in terms of your customer experience to integrate your DAM with your web content management system, because then you can refer to your authoritative photography, you can refer to your authoritative brand assets, so that you don't want to manage that separately in the CMS. Ideally, a CMS would be pulling that those particular files and presenting them from the DAM rather than storing two versions.
Yeah, one question in this direction, actually. What are the key system DAM has to integrate with?
Well, definitely CMS, no question. Simply because that's the vehicle for really delivering things to the customer. In a product company, it's PIM, or product information management. So usually people want to search for assets by the product criteria. They specifically might be searching based on product data and not data about the image itself. So having the metadata about the product associated with an image is very important. So that integration is super important. I would also say marketing automation, or MRM tools, because you want to integrate maybe with resources, perhaps rights and royalties would be another one. So if you have a rights management system, especially if you're a media company, if you're creating cinema or advertising where people have to get paid and rights have to be tracked, that tends to be another one. Those are really the big ones.
Yes, we still have a couple of minutes to answer, I think, one or two last questions. So this one is more personal for you, Theresa. Do you help brand clients to set up their own DAM solution?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. Do I have?
Yes. Do you help brands? Do you help brands to set up their own DAM solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't do the technical work, but I guide the process really, and I help, especially for people who haven't done it before. I act as an ongoing strategist throughout the process. So I've recently gone through 3 implementations where I was essentially aiding the communication between the vendor and the customer. And that's especially important, I think, because vendors are often in their very expert world, and they often are using language that is not necessarily clear to the person who's implementing the system, because they might be new to DAM. So I'm often just helping bridge that gap. And then the other thing I do is just the data piece, as I call myself a data orchestrator, because sometimes people start to set up a DAM and they realize that their data is just a mess. And if the data is not in good shape, the DAM isn't going to work. It's not going to be successful. So that's a lot of what I end up doing once the system is selected.
Okay, so and maybe the last question, because it's almost end of this session. So could you share example of KPI for measuring the performance of the assets? Do you have some recommendation? What kind of KPI would you recommend to set up?
Yeah, I think the most important one, especially for marketers, is time to market. How long does it take you to get your campaign out? And I would say that being able to find the right photo and the right brand assets is the #1 factor in delaying time to market for marketing campaigns. And so measuring how long does it take you now to get a campaign together versus after you have a DAM, when you have a single source of truth where everybody can go to find what they need, that usually is the biggest one. And then just other efficiencies, reuse is very important as well. A lot of retailers that I work with, they're saying, oh my gosh, I have to order another photo shoot because I can't find the photo. So that costs a lot of money. The other one is also just reducing the amount of email is even something that I've had people measure, because there's so many requests that go around all over the place for I need this asset, do you have it? Or I need that asset, do you have it? So things have to do with findability, efficiency, and time to market are really the biggest ones.
So I think we're just now reaching the end of this webinar. Thank you, Theresa, for sharing with us your expertise, your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to thank all participants to joining us for this webinar, and I wish you a good end of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.